Good morning, class. Hi, this is Mr. Stewart, and this is going to be the Chapter 4 lecture in regard to crime analysis for security risk management. And I want to take just a minute to talk about kind of the importance of connecting this issue of crime statistics and crime rates to security risk management, because when you are looking at losses that occur due to crimes, and you can have lots of different reasons for the losses in any business, but when you're looking at the losses that are due to criminal activity, you need to have an understanding of where you fit in regard to how much this particular offense is occurring also within society. Because, and if you know how the likelihood and the ratio that a particular offense like theft is occurring in society, then you know that if it's occurring a lot in society, it very likely can occur at your location as well. So understanding that there is a need to look at crime rates and where they fit into your particular facility, your particular location, is important in fully understanding this whole idea of assessing risk and developing policy, procedures, and behaviors in order to mitigate the risk. So understand that statistics are used to plan for the future and let us know where we've been. Because what statistics are is simply just a numerical representation that gives us tendencies in regard to where we've experienced our own losses and what those losses are for. Crime and security statistics really guide our risk assessment process. Helps us to get on track to what we're looking for and what risk we are assessing, how viable that threat is, the likelihood that we're going to experience a loss from that. And one of the best ways we can determine future losses, going back and looking at previous losses. If it's been done before, it will probably be done again. That should not be your only tool for assessing future loss or predicting future loss, but understand going back and looking to see where we've experienced losses of some sort in the future are very important to see, or in the past are very important to see where we're going to be in the future. Statistics can also help us in the selection of countermeasures, and countermeasures are simply those things that we can employ. It can be an action, it can be a behavior, it can be a policy, it can be a procedure that will help us to mitigate our losses and hopefully even possibly prevent losses from occurring. So countermeasures are those things that are counter to the actual loss. It's our answer to it, and it may be in a reactive mode, and it's also in a proactive mode too. Yes, we can deploy a countermeasure once we've begun experiencing a loss in order to stop that loss or lower that loss. But if we've put effective countermeasures in place, that's also going to act as a good prevention to keep from experiencing said loss as well. And just understand that, this kind of goes without saying, but just to make sure you're aware that when we are putting those countermeasures in place to prevent or mitigate losses, that should result in alleviating risks and cost. Because the whole idea behind security is that you are figuring out a way so that the facility, the people, the information, the product manufactured stay safe. Now, when I say stay safe, I'm talking about not only are you making sure that we can make it correctly, that we keep the people safe who are making the information or the product, but what we're also doing is making sure that we're protecting our assets, and when we're protecting our assets, we're keeping costs down, and which makes profit margins increase. Costs down, profit margins increase. So crime statistics are really just crime rate data, like theft rates, murder rates, assault rates, things like that. Understanding this crime data can really help us in the assessment process by showing us the issues and also the holes in our security system. It's important to understand that if you've experienced a lot of assaults, at your particular facility, then there's a hole in your security somewhere that is allowing those things to happen. Either you're allowing the wrong people in, or somebody's not effectively watching the people who are in, or there's some other breakdown in your security strategy and your security behaviors and your security procedures. So with that being said, we need to look at previous losses, previous crime statistics, compare them with the crime statistics from society so that we know what the likely losses are on our behalf. Okay. Looking at your PowerPoint, when you should be able to, if you look on slide 3 of 9, I believe, on your PowerPoint for this particular week, you're going to see something called the crime triangle. And the crime triangle is just a real basic way to understand crime. That crime can only occur if the 3 sides or 3 legs of that triangle are present. The first leg of that triangle has to do with a target. That's where you as security come in. You may be working for a facility or a company that potentially is a target of crime. And there's not a whole lot of ways to get around that. If you're manufacturing something that other people want, if they want to steal it or they want to sabotage it or whatever, that this leg is going to be there. Is almost every facility is some sort of suitable target. The next thing you have to have in order for crime to occur is a motivated offender. And what I'm talking about here is they have to have the drive. They have to have the want to, the motivation to commit the crime. Your book says a person ready and willing to commit a crime. So that person has to have that motivation. The second thing is you have to have the opportunity. And what the opportunity is the ability of that motivated offender to gain access to that suitable target. Not every motivated offender has access to the target, but if they do gain access to the target, you have the potential for crime to occur at that particular location. And this it's really simple. You have the crime triangle. You have one leg is motivated offender, other leg is suitable target, and then the other leg is the opportunity, which is access by the offender to the target. All 3 of those must be in place before crime can occur, at least from what we're talking about in regard to a security perspective. You got to have the target, you got to have the offender, and you got to have the offender having access to the target. Now there is a little bit more complicated way to describe crime that adds a few more components to this basic crime triangle. If you were to look in slide 4 of your PowerPoint, what you're also going to see is that crime triangle, but it's going to have another triangle on the outside of it with a few more components added to it. You still have the offender, the motivated offender, you still have the opportunity, you still have the target identified, but what you also have is what we call an absent or ineffective handler as another component. Your book says that this is a person who influences the behavior of the offender. Handlers include parents, relatives, friends, teachers, and employers. So basically, you have a motivated offender who has no social controls. Nobody is exacting any control over that person. So an absent or ineffective handler is required in many cases for that offender to continue to gain motivation to commit the crime or to get access to that particular suitable target. Almost all of us growing up had handlers, and handler is simply a fancy word. It simply means somebody who exact social controls over us. They control our behavior to some degree. Now, it may be an actual physical control where somebody's physically restraining you, handling you, if you will, but it may also simply be just a authority, that person having some authority over you and you respecting that person, not wanting to let them down. So if that person is ineffective or their control is ineffective, that adds another component to that crime triangle. You may also have an absent or ineffective guardian, and that's a person who protects the target from harm. Now, we're not saying a guardian of the offender here. We're talking about a guardian of the target. Guess what? That's you. When we're talking about security, you are the guardian of the target. And it's your responsibility to protect that target from any attack, whether it be physical attack, electronic attack, or whatever. So the guardian is supposed to protect the target from harm. Guardians can include police, parents, relatives, friends, or property managers, security, etc. Whoever is responsible for protecting whatever the identified target is. And if that person's not doing a good job, or if they're ineffective, or they're simply not there, then again it becomes easy for crime to happen. And then the last leg of that extra or added component to the crime triangle, as espoused on page 4 or slide 4 of your PowerPoint, is time and space. Time is the period for the first 4 ingredients to come together, and the first 4 ingredients are your motivated offender, your absent or ineffective handler, your suitable target, the opportunity, the absent or ineffective guardian, if you will. So the time is when all 4 of those things come together, and now you have increased opportunity because everything is falling in place. And then you have space. And space is simply a place for these first several things to cross paths. When the right time comes along, you got the right motivated offender, you have a lack of control over that offender, and you have a lack of protection in regard to your target, it creates a perfect storm, if you will, of the time and the place and the opportunity for that offender to be able to engage in criminal activity against that target. And hopefully that explains that a little bit better than what your textbook did. But, you know, basically to have crime, you got to have an offender, an opportunity, and a target. As it becomes a little more complicated and you start adding more components, not only do you have to have those 3 things, but the time and the place really kind of speak toward that opportunity when all of those other things come together. And plus you have a lack of control over the offender, and you have a lack of protection of the target, creates that perfect storm to allow for an offense to take place. So what's the purpose of crime analysis in regard to security? Knowing what has happened previously and why things have happened previously goes a long way towards preventing them in the future. You may have heard that history has a way of repeating itself. The reason that history repeats itself is because we don't take notice of it, and we don't apply the mistakes that were made that caused whatever the issue was to happen in the first place to keep it from happening again. So if you've been attacked, or if you've had losses due to theft, if you have had losses due to injury that may be due to safety issues with equipment, and you don't do anything to improve the safety, you don't do anything to decrease the opportunity for theft, you're going to have thefts again. You're going to have injuries again, and it's going to cause you to experience a lot of losses. So because of that, we have to look at what has happened in the past. Where have we been the victim of crime in the past, and how have we answered that? And did it work? Did it not work? Did we do anything about it? If we haven't done anything about it, I guarantee you're setting yourself up to be victimized again. So, for example, if you're planning for a possible loss, wouldn't it be important to know that you had $300,000 worth of theft in the previous year? I mean, I think that's pretty important. That's a statistic. That's a piece of knowledge. That's a piece of information you need. What was our level of loss last year due to theft? If it was low and we had more losses due to something else, some other crime, then okay, let's worry about the other crime more. But if you had $300,000 lost just due to theft, for most companies, that's a big hit. So what can you do to reduce that and mitigate that? What kind of procedures, policies, behaviors, and actions can you put in place to keep that from happening again? That's this whole idea of not only identifying your risk, but assessing your risk and then developing suitable countermeasures to keep losses due to that risk from happening again. Don't ignore the statistics. The numbers are there. You need to know how to read them and what they mean. And, you know, when you see that you have experienced a certain percentage of loss and you want to decrease that percentage, you have to do something to decrease that percentage. It's not going to decrease by itself. You're going to have to do something to decrease that percentage. It may be a procedure, it may be a policy, it may be a behavior, it may be an action, it may simply be something very simple all the way up to something very complex. So when that happens, you have to do something. You can't just sit idly by and keep doing the status quo, because I guarantee you will continue to experience those losses. So crime analysis really seeks to evaluate the actual risk at a company's facility. We look at previous losses, what's the potential for actual loss for these particular reasons again. We also use crime rates and crime analysis to reduce crime on the property. And it may simply be that you've had a lot of thefts from employees' vehicles in the parking lot, which you're not necessarily responsible for, but it may be causing issues with your production because your employees are not happy, thinking that somebody's going to be breaking into their car while they're at work. And it could potentially cause a more dangerous situation if somebody catches somebody breaking into something at work. And it may be some things that you can do to prevent those losses from even happening to your employees. Maybe even better lighting, security cameras, signage, controlled access to the parking lot. Things that most companies who are thinking about this already do. But maybe you're a company that has always just had a day shift, and now you're running a night shift and maybe even a third shift, and you never really thought about having lights in the parking lot because it wasn't needed, and now you're experiencing, or at least maybe your employees are experiencing some losses because you don't have lights in the parking lot, or you don't have security cameras, or you're not having somebody controlling access. It's important to understand there's some things that you can do that will actually keep you from experiencing losses due to production loss because your employees aren't happy, simply by doing some things to mitigate losses that the employees themselves may be experiencing on your property that you don't really have. It's not a direct loss to the employer, but it's more of a secondary loss because they're unhappy. Maybe they're not showing up for work. Production is going down, etc. So, you have to start thinking in those terms. You think outside the box a little bit and think about bigger picture things instead of the very specific things. Now, specificity is important, but a lot of times when you are a security manager, you got to look at the big picture, and then you leave it up to individual people to come up with the specific things. But big picture, you're trying to prevent those losses and use previous losses and statistics and crime rates and things from those previous losses to say, here's what can happen again, and we don't want it to happen again, so we're going to mitigate that by policy, procedure, behavior, or action. You can also use crime analysis to justify your budget. When you look at how much money that you're asking the company to spend on security, and you say, well, we need to install security cameras in the parking lot. We need to put better locks on every door in the facility. We need to control access into the facility, and here's how much it's going to cost. And they look at the number and they gasp, that's a lot of money. Well, if you look at the amount of loss they had previous year, or maybe the previous 5 years combined, and I guarantee you, if you're asking to spend money on it, the money you're going to spend now is probably not going to add up to the amount of losses they've experienced in the past. Unless it's something really, really big, and then you can say that the potential losses would be mitigated by spending this money now instead of losing this money on a continuous basis. And management understands that. When they see a number, they want an explanation for the number, so it helps you justify whatever your budget is. Crime analysis also seeks to continually monitor the effectiveness of security programs and personnel. How do you know if you're doing a good job? Well, you look at last year's theft loss versus this year's theft loss. If you had more this year than you did last year, somebody's not doing a good job. Some policy isn't working. Some behavior action isn't working. So you have to go back to the drawing board and figure out something else. If you have a less amount of loss this year than you did last year, then probably what you're doing is working. Keep going, improve it. Get those losses down even more. Crime analysis also seeks to provide evidence of due diligence and reduce liability exposure. It shows that you are doing something to try to protect the company, the assets, and the people and the information. Doing nothing will always get you sued. Doing something will get you sued, but you will probably come out much better in a lawsuit situation if you can say that, hey, I acted with due diligence, we were taking steps to fix this issue, etc. Give you for example, colleges who've experienced shootings, and we've seen lots of schools experience shootings in the last several years. So up to security staff and personnel for those colleges to try to figure out how we can prevent a shooting from happening. If a college did absolutely nothing to prevent a shooting and they had a shooting, I guarantee you they're going to be paying through the nose to whoever the victims and the victims' families are, and maybe anybody else that experienced trauma. But if you had a shooting and you can say that, hey, here's the steps we were taking, we did this, this, and this in order to try to prevent this from happening, and without it we think our loss would have been much greater, then yes, you're probably still going to get sued. You're going to have to pay something, but it's going to be much less than what it would have been previously if you had done nothing. With security and liability, something is always better than nothing. If you're doing something, you're on the right track. As long as you're consistently evaluating it and trying to improve it, seeing if it's working, if it's not working, figuring out what will work. Make sense? Okay. Where do you get the data in order to do crime analysis? Well, you get it from security reports, what security personnel have written and you have in your files, because not everything is always reported to the police. So therefore, you're going to have incidences at your facility of losses due to theft, assaults, injuries, etc. You're going to have those things there that you can compile statistically. You can go to the police, or actually, kind of indirectly, you can go online to the FBI website and look at the Uniform Crime Reports, which actually looks at crime data in your area. You can find it according to your area for a specific crime and say, in this area of the country, thefts are, at this percentage, our thefts are at this percentage, and so you can justify continued budgetary requests by saying that we're lower than the national average. We're doing something right. We want to continue doing that. Guys, I apologize for the sniffling here. You can also contact your local police department and see how many calls for service they've had in regard to something, how many reports they've taken. They should be able to share that information with you for no trouble. Give you copies of offense reports. So you can gather that information. You just need to know where to go get it. So from your own internal documentation, hopefully those reports are being made, and then from local police and from the FBI UCR, which is the Uniform Crime Reports. So before getting into crime analysis methodology, you have to first determine where you will get the relevant data necessary and where to conduct the analysis. And I think that's pretty important. You got to know where to get the data. I just told you where to get the data from, and you got to know where to conduct the analysis. You're not going to conduct an analysis on something you're experiencing a very small loss on unless you have been able to mitigate every other larger loss that you've had in the past. Some companies simply write off a certain amount of money for a loss every year, that they're going to lose something. And they build that into their profit projections and profit margins and all of that stuff. So some of it is just not really worth wasting your time on, so to speak. Go after the big fish, the things that are causing larger losses or have the potential to cause a larger loss. Let's say you have a company that manufactures a Flugelbinder. that's a fictitious product. And let's say that company is experiencing a higher than normal for the past year usage of toilet paper, which means they may be thinking that somebody's stealing some toilet paper. If their profit margin is wide and they are not experiencing any other losses except this cost of toilet paper is kind of out through the nose, through the roof. So yes, maybe they look at ways in which we can secure the toilet paper better. Maybe they, instead of having rolls of it out, maybe they put the little machines on the stalls. I mean, the little dispensers, so that you can't take the whole roll type of thing. You can't steal a roll and take it home. But if they're experiencing losses from some other source that are much larger than just the higher cost of toilet paper, they're not going to be worried as much about that toilet paper until they get that other loss under control. So it's also about prioritizing the loss and where you need to conduct your analysis. Don't waste your time on the small stuff until there are no other big fish to fry, so to speak. When you have got everything down to small stuff, that's when you can focus on the small things. But you focus on the areas in which the most losses are occurring over the shortest period of time. If you look in your textbook, pages 71 to 83, I'm going to draw your attention to that. And basically it talks about the methodology for how we go about doing crime analysis. And I don't think that I can explain that any better than your text does. And I'm just telling you that, please, I want you to read the methodology. It's really straightforward. It talks about how we go about getting the information, how we go about analyzing the information and interpreting the results. It's not terribly difficult. There are some basic mathematical calculations such as crime rates, computing crime rates, and basically it is taking your crime rate data or your incidence data. Say you have 1,000 murders, and you are dividing it by the population. Let's say you have 1,000 murders per 10,000 people, and then multiply that by 1,000, and that gives you a typical crime rate, a percentage point in that population. You have 1,000 murders for 10,000 people. You've got a 10% murder rate, which is that's really, really high. We don't have that in our society. I'm awful glad that we don't. But I mean, something like that type of calculation is pretty basic. It's espoused in your textbook. If you look on page 76 in your book, it has a spreadsheet with particular crimes, and it just shows you how we go about compiling individual crimes into a spreadsheet, and then basically you can add those things up and determine a crime rate. It also talks about some graphing and analysis, such as temporal analysis, spatial analysis, etc. You're not going to be tested on being able to do these calculations, but I want you to be exposed to it. So please read that in your textbook. And if you have questions, feel free to send me an email through course messages or post something in the discussion board about it, and I'll be happy to answer that. But I want you to make sure you read that section in regard to the methodology, just so you have a basic understanding of how we get the crime rate. And honestly, in today's age, the crime rates are already computed for you as far as in your area of the country where you live. The only thing you'll have to do is to kind of calculate the crime rate for a particular crime in your facility. For example, if you have 300 people working in your facility and you had 26 thefts, find my calculator here just a second. If you had 26 thefts, divide that by 300 people, that tells me that in your population right now you have a 0.086 percentage of theft within that population for that particular period of time. And I mean, you know, you would look at that number, and then you would multiply that by 1,000, and that should give you, yeah, that gives you back that same number. But and then look at crime thefts in your area of the country, and if yours is higher than what's going on out in the real world, you got a big problem. If yours is lower, hey, that's a good thing. You can still fix that. You can still mitigate that theft, but at least it's not as high as what the crime rates are out in your neighborhood, which you hope that a crime is not happening more often in your work than it is out in the real world. Actually, you want it to be low in both places, but at least if it's happening less in your work, then you know that you're doing something correct. All right. Again, make sure you read that methodology section, and that's pretty much it for chapter 4. It basically talks about that connection between crime rates and talks about how we go about getting crime rates. And honestly, what I was saying just a minute ago is that it's a very simple calculation to get crime rate for a particular crime in your facility, because you have a small population and you're probably going to have a small number of rates. If you go on the Calhoun College website, there are find a link for security or something under student affairs in regard to security. You can pull up, you should be able to pull up our crime rate data for the college for the last year or so. And if you look at the incidences of crime that we've had on this campus versus the incidences of the same crime that we've had in Huntsville or Decatur, you can see that we're much, much lower. We don't have those same incidences per population as somebody else does, which means our security procedures and practices and behaviors and actions are working pretty well. All right, if you have questions, make sure you get in touch with me, and have a great week, and I'll see you again next week for another lecture. Bye-bye.